Iceman. Iceman's a real interesting character, especially at this point in the mid-90s. He was having some real ups and downs through his life and the stories that he was being written in. It was a real mixed bag for him. He was really sort of starting to experiment with his sort of molecular ice abilities. Before, where he would just sort of be a guy, a humanoid looking form that turns into ice. We see in the Age of Apocalypse arc that Iceman has really sort of mastered his powers, and he can almost like morph his body. I got some real sort of T-1000 kind of vibes from him. He'd sort of morph into the wall and come out. It was a really cool thing that the character in the 616 never had to fully adopt or take on these powers, but at this stage in the 90s he was starting to discover them. In a couple of issues time he would end up getting an entire hole punched through his chest by Post, the emissary of Onslaught, and it's a huge sort of terrifying event for him because he's like, there's a hole in my chest, like WTF, what am I gonna do? And it took some mental conditioning from Emma Frost to convince him to have the bravery, the nerve to turn back into his human form and trust that he's not gonna be human with a bloody great big hole in his chest. So that was an interesting way of discovering his powers. By the time this issue comes out, he hasn't got that far, but he has started to use his frost and ice powers more. As you can see in the splash page, just become this huge, hulking, frosty muck Iceman type character. He looks like a potato wedge that would have fallen out of the packet and got lost at the bottom of the freezer, and then you find it when you're defrosting it, and you're like, oh, what was that? So yeah, Iceman is big and hulking, looks pretty badass, but again, in the comics, Sabretooth makes short work of him, at least for a moment's sake. But before we get on to that, let's have a look at his figure. Iceman's figure is something that I have a love-hate relationship with. I love it. It's beautiful. I mean, first thing first, this thing is just stunning. Like I've said before in previous videos, you make anything translucent that the light can shine through, it just makes it look so pretty and is instantly going to win points with me, and this is just something else. The entire body being made in this one single perfect form, it just looks awesome. And then you go to the sculpt and you see the angles and the ridges that are put on. So he's got his hair and it's all angled like it's been chiseled out of ice, and then you've got the extra features on like the elbows and the knees of the jagged icicles coming out of there. It looks so great. They've taken what is essentially a basic human male form and just angled and curved and sharpened, not curved, that's the whole opposite. They've sharpened all the edges to make it look like he's just got this angular ice-like form. He's got the attachment on the back, which gives the extra ice shards protruding and sticking up from there. Looks great, looks so great. I'm a huge fan of this. But I don't know what kind of material or substance this plastic is made out of, but it is not the same as the other Legends are. This translucent stuff is different and it behaves differently, it moves differently, and you got to be careful with it, because quite appropriately, of all my figures, when they are in the sun, in the heat, when the light's coming through, the only one of them that actually melts is Iceman. So kudos to Hasbro for that little attention to detail. The plastic is very sort of rubbery. It's quite soft, and his joints will be incredibly gummy if you're not careful with them. So he's very difficult to stand. It's not easy to keep Iceman on his own 2 feet because he just doesn't sort of lock into position like you would expect most do. It's not that his joints are loose, it's just that they're bendy. So he will just, his feet will slide like he's doing the splits if he stays in one position for too long, which is why I normally position him in a kind of a kneeling sort of, I actually like it because I like my figures sort of on different levels, so it gives it more of a dynamic group pose to have him kneeling down, but really that's actually just because I can't stand him very well. Now, one thing I'm very cautious of because of the rubberiness of the material, the brittleness of it, I swear his ankle is hanging on by a thread, and I am so afraid to move it, because this figure is not easy to come by anymore. This is not like a crazy rare figure, but this Iceman is tough to get. So I do not want to move his ankle anymore. I had to hold my breath when I realized it was facing the wrong way, and I was like, which way do I turn it to put it the correct way? Is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? I can't tell, and whichever way I turn it, it's I managed to get it facing the correct way. I hope it's gonna stay like that and I can just leave him as it is. Let sleeping dogs lie. Now, this isn't the only Iceman figure that's out. There's a retro vintage one as well, which looks great. But in fitting with the 92 style X-Men, the one that I have, I think works so much better. But the retro one looks very nice. He's a different kind of plastic, a different sort of white kind of color. His hair is the more sort of vintage, sensible kind of look. He doesn't have the cool angled dynamics that this one does. So I would always take this Iceman over the other one. I think it's a shame that he doesn't have his ice slide, like a nice kind of base for him to be on. That's something that Hasbro could really do with improving. If they do re-release the figure, I'd love them to keep that angled design, but give him an ice slide, and then I think he would look absolutely terrific. Now, Sabretooth manages to get past Iceman and Cyclops surprisingly easy to an extent. You know, he basically rushes them, and Cyclops, as always happens, because Cyclops is quite not overpowered, but he's a very powerful character. You know, you have to write him out quite quickly, so he'll always get his visor knocked off or his glasses knocked off, and all of a sudden he goes from being OP to, you know, not being able to see. So he's out of the equation. And again, it's a great sort of character moment of Victor Creed. Just shows how nasty he is, that like he goes straight for the eyes. He's like, he's not taking any prisoners. He's like, no, I've been playing possum for long enough. Now I'm going to gouge your eyes out. But fortunately for Psyche, Iceman saves him from having a fingernail eye-ectomy. But again, even hulking frost giant Iceman gets slashed by Sabretooth, and Sabretooth just smashes through the window. And smashing through the window is such a comic trope that I find really funny, because just visualize smashing through a window. I don't care if you're superpowered, that's gonna mess you up badly. And I think especially in the 90s, in the 90s there was a lot of pointless window smashing, where people would smash through windows even if they didn't have to. Like, if there's a door right there. One of my favorite characters of all time is Kane, the evil Spider-Man clone. And especially like during the 90s, during the Clone Saga, Kane never saw a window that he did not want to smash through. There was even a really funny instance, I thought, where he was talking to Mary Jane in their apartment, in Peter and her apartment, and they're having this sort of heart-to-heart, and Kane's like, right, I gotta go now, and just smashes through the window. And I'm sure Mary Jane was like, WTF? We gotta pay for that. But anyway, I digress. So Sabretooth, he gets out, he escapes down into the subway tunnel. So now it's time for Sabretooth versus the Beast. So let's take a look at Beast's figure. And this is a figure that is currently, as of making this video, in very high demand. It seems like each of the 92 X-Men characters go through their own phases of becoming rarer and rarer, and seeing the price go higher and higher and higher. Beast is currently in high demand, especially with the Age of Apocalypse Dark Beast having come out, which is such a great figure. When you put them side by side, it just looks money. So now people really want this classic blue Beast here. So the sculpt itself is a very, very popular design. People really, really like this, and I can see why. It's difficult to capture fur in that sort of solid plastic. You know, fur by its very nature is soft and plastic is hard, so there might be like a bit of a disconnect when you have a character that's completely covered in fur, but they do this really well. They give it a wonderful sort of sense of texture, and the different washes, the paintwork gives the fur some feeling of depth, like, you know, if you could touch it, you could sink your fingers into it. So I think they really do capture the Beast very well. Speaking of capturing him though, they've captured him in this one angry face sculpt design. And that's something that's been a little bone of contention for some people, because Beast so often is portrayed as this, articulate, book savvy, quiet, Shakespeare quoting Renaissance man. Especially, you'll even have him with his glasses on and a very contemplative kind of look on his face, which is not the case here. We get Angry Beast here. And you know what? Angry Beast is great. Angry Beast is great for action poses and all that kind of thing. But there have been a lot of modders and customizers who have made a cerebral, let's say, a cerebral Beast head to put on this figure so that you can have both diverse looks. Fortunately, for the sake of this comic, we want Angry Beast, because Beast shows up, he confronts Sabretooth on a subway train, and it is on. This is the Beast that I hadn't encountered before, because this was one of the first X-Men comics that I read after only really being familiar with the cartoon. And of course, with the cartoon, he is that Kelsey Grammer sort of like, a rose, but by any other name would still smell as sweet. And this Beast is like, I'm gonna break your nose and smash your face into the glass. I was like, whoa, damn, Hank McCoy. These guys have a great back and forth until, once again, Sabretooth manages to slip through the net and he is out on the streets. And I think that'll just about do it for this one. Gosh, I know what you're thinking. Well, David, with these 2 posts in one day, you are really spoiling us. That was from the old Ferrero Rocher advert. Monsieur, with these Ferrero Rocher, you are really spoiling us. No? No one remembers that? I remember that. Just me. I'm sorry, I don't know why I do these little addendums at the end. The whole point of doing these was to make it like a nice professional bookend, and instead I just end up rambling into a camera. Go on, get out of here. I'm done with you now. Check back in later. And like, share, and subscribe, because I got like 2 new subscribers in the last couple of days. And I'm like, if I don't have imaginary people who I don't actually know liking my videos, then what the hell is this all about?